Welcome to another edition of Maverick University. I'm your host, David Hallberg. Joining me today is Pastor Jonn Morrow, pastor of New Hope Baptist Church in Keenan, Wisconsin. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Good to be here.
I wanted to just introduce you to the folks on our YouTube channel. You were a big blessing to our ministry a couple years ago when you came and you did some preaching for us. Pastor Gomez, at the time, our pastor, had asked you to come in. And you weren't new to us. We had seen you, had been here in our ministry before, and had been a part of our ministry before, just visiting for conferences and things. But you got up and you preached, and it was the most unique sermon I had ever heard. It was just simply talking, more of a talk. It was an educational, like a TED talk, really, about depression. And you talked about your personal experience with it. And with a topic like that, there's a lot of preconceived ideas that everyone has about it. You watch a commercial about depression medication, and you hear people talk about, man, so many people, just why are people depressed? They need Jesus. Come on, just get over it, whatever. And that sermon really just slapped me into reality with what depression is and who are these people that are dealing with depression and what are they dealing with. And so I'm not going to basically have you rehash everything you talked about because you can't do it in 15 minutes.
Right.
But I'll encourage people to go into the link in the description below. Please go in the description below and click on that link and watch Brother Morrow talk about what he was talking about, and it give you a fuller understanding of what he was dealing with. But I just want to kind of key off of some things that you had said and just ask you to kind of expound on those. Depression, anxiety. What is depression? What is anxiety? Is this a spiritual issue? I suppose it could be, but what is it?
Well, I grew up not knowing anything about this. I always thought depression was somebody, they're just down. Anxiety is that you just can't handle certain things. And so for 40 years of my life, I didn't know anything about it. But then I got sick and things kind of snowballed. And I would describe anxiety. You can start to have like panic attacks, they call it, or anxiety attacks, where it's not something you can control. If you don't want to be that way, and so I think that stress is kind of where it starts. It can build up stress, then it leads into anxiety, and then if it doesn't get help there, it leads into depression. And depression is not just being down; it's very debilitating. Just absolutely a dark place, a miserable place, and you can't believe it's happening, So I didn't know anything about it. Like I said, we grew up in church, always in church, and it can be because of sin. But I found in my study about it and learning about other people that had it, and I talk about it in the message about Charles Spurgeon. When you read about him, he dealt with it and talked about it and talked about how dark it was, and I would have never understood that until you go through it. And now I guess my burden is for people that are hurting to know that there's help, and you can get help. And instead of just writing people off that have it, realize they really need something.
Sure.
So.
Yeah, so you talked about how it snowballed. It's not like these anxiety attacks are triggered by a particular event. It's not like one stressful day is pushing you over the edge. Right. This is built up over time. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, and I learned that stress. I always thought that stress was okay. You had a stressful day. We've all had stressful days.
Sure, absolutely.
And then the next day you start again. But I learned that stress builds up over time, and it can take some traumatic event, like somebody has a car accident or they lose a loved one, and you hear about the soldiers coming back with PTSD. They've and that triggers it. And then it can build, and so a lot of people have never dealt with it. It just kind of comes in certain situations come together, and it triggers it, and but stress is a building factor in it.
So it goes from the stress then to anxiety, then to depression. That's how you described it. It's not just one day you wake up and you're depressed. It's kind of, was it for you kind of a gradual thing as well, where one thing built on top of the other?
Yeah, and I had no idea what was happening. I didn't know about this, and I remember thinking to myself, how could I go to Bible college even and never hear about this ever happened to a pastor? I just never heard about it.
Sure.
So for me, I was totally in the dark, and so I was trying to figure this out, what's going on with me, what's happening, and it was really a hard time, and gradually the Lord helped me to understand what was happening. I remember thinking about the book of James, where it talks about, if any man lack wisdom, let him ask of God. And I remember just crying out to God and said, Lord, please help me to understand. And then I went online and did some research, and began to see a lot of the symptoms. I was having symptoms that were like heart attack symptoms, so I thought it was all physical. It took a long time to get over the physical to realize it was anxiety and depression, because the signs are similar. And I talk about that in the sermon, is that you need to thoroughly get checked out medically, make sure there's no physical.
First things first.
Yeah, so once I got all that checked out, then I started to say, okay, maybe now I'm hearing about this, reading about this, they're saying the same symptoms can come from something else. So then I began to realize that, okay, maybe I'm not having a heart attack, and because the feelings that you feel, or at least I did, stabbing chest pains, I mean, the feelings was very real.
They were very real physical.
Yeah, where anybody that is critical of somebody that has depression or anxiety, if they were going through it and they were having these physical symptoms, I guarantee they would say, what's wrong? Something's happening here. You're not making it up. So it's happening, but it's not harmful, as far as it's not a real medical issue, but it mimics. So a big learning experience for me.
For sure, yeah. So as you went through this process, you had these physical manifestations. Doctors were just sending you home saying, we don't see anything wrong with you, physically, doing all these x-rays, CT scans. I'm sure you went through so many things, but can you describe what are these physical manifestations? What were the main ones? And when you talk to other people, what are the most common things that people deal with these physical feelings?
Well, for me, it was I got sick, and I woke up one morning and I had fever. Well, I felt feverish. My daughter was sick. I thought, okay, I've got what she's got. But the difference was I had tightness in my chest. So it was not just feel like you're getting sick, tightness in my chest. Well, in a few days, the kind of the fever stuff went away, but my chest was tight. I said, what is that? So I went to the doctor and told my doctor about it, and she said, well, they took it serious. Let's do a CT scan, or not CT, EKG, and do a chest x-ray. So they did both of those. She said, chest x-ray looks fine, but when they did the EKG, she said it shows that you've had a heart attack. So here I'm sitting in the doctor's office and getting that news. I'm like, wow, I'm 40 years old and I've had a heart attack at some point. And so now later on, I got another one later, and it said I didn't have a heart attack, that they had the lead in the wrong place. But at the moment, so that kind of just built. So the tightness of the chest probably was stressful situations building up. Then I get the news I've had a heart attack, and then...
Well, that only adds to the stress.
Yeah, and then going in an ambulance ride, I ended up calling the ambulance and going in, and you think that this might be it.
Yeah.
So I think that the stress, then the anxiety of that, then that led into the depression. Yeah. So it was a lot of things building. Now, if people can catch it before it gets there, I don't think they'd ever get into the deep depression. Now, I know there's a spectrum to depression because I've talked with a lot of people.
Okay.
And I feel like I was way in the deep end. I know there's some people that have more milder symptoms, but what I went through was just, this is really bad.
Really exceptional.
Yeah.
You talked about these anxiety attacks. An anxiety attack, it's not like you're fearing any particular thing. It's just you're fearful of what? Of anything, and for no reason? Is that accurate?
and that's the thing when you start getting into that, is that we know all the scriptures about fear. You're not supposed to fear, okay? So what's happening, and I learned this later, and I'm reading and researching, I'm learning what happened. I can go back and say, now I know, but your body naturally has a fight or flight, thing that God built into us for if something happens, you're going to run or you're going to fight or whatever. Sure. So stress and anxiety can trigger that. And once you get in that mode, like if you almost, have an accident, you've all done that or come close to something, your heart's racing, pounding, you're like, boy, well,
it's a very weird experience when you do have that adrenaline dump.
And it's last maybe 30 seconds.
Yeah.
So what happens with this is that you're stuck in that. So the fear never goes away. It's 30 seconds, then you're living within that fear, and you're trying to think, why am I afraid? There's nothing to be afraid. But you can't make it stop. So that fear builds, and so I call it irrational fear. Mm-hmm. But what I found out with me was I was stuck in high gear, fight or flight, and I couldn't get out of it. And I didn't know all that.
And there was a chemical reason for it happening in your body.
Yeah.
Wow.
So what I didn't know, and some people don't know, and so I would say that's like a panic attack or anxiety attack can be like that.
So you got the stress situation, physical manifestations, anxiety attack. That's a chemical issue, but it has results. You talked about the inability to even read. Mm-hmm. In your sermon, you talked about how you couldn't even really string thoughts together. And I guess that's true when you're in those fight or flight situations. Your brain just doesn't even think. You just act,
Yeah, you want to get better. I don't want to be like this. What can I do? I'll try to read, get my mind, try to read something, try to watch something on TV and I couldn't even do those things. I lost all my appetite. I couldn't eat.
Something as simple as watching television. That's the definition of like a mindless activity, but you couldn't even do that.
Yeah.
Wow, that's tremendous. Yeah. It's very difficult. Then you talked about, so you get past the anxiety attacks and you got this depression, almost this, you talked about, was it depersonalization was the term that you used?
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about what that felt like, and if somebody's experiencing that,
sure,
kind of describe it for them so they
can and again, I learned this afterward what it was, but so I was sitting in the living room with my family, and a couple of kids were doing homework, and my wife was doing something on her computer, I think, and I remember just feeling all of a sudden that I didn't belong there. This is my family, but I didn't belong in my own home. Mm-hmm. And it's a really scary and strange feeling, and almost like I was detached. I was there, but I wasn't involved in what was going on. I just was very, so it was a very troubling thing. And that, again, this stuff builds and gets you deeper into the depression part, because this was still part, I think, of the anxiety when that was going on. And so 2 times that happened to me where I experienced that. Later on, I found a website, anxietycenter.com, and on there, the people that counsel or help people have all been people who have recovered from anxiety and depression, so they know what they're talking about. But they make videos, and you can watch the videos on certain subjects. So I saw this video, depersonalization. I watch it, and they describe exactly what I went through, and I was like, wow, this is a real thing. And I was so excited.
Yeah, it gives you some validation.
Yeah, this is real. This does happen to people. Yeah. So, that's something that can happen. It's the neurotransmitters in your brain they're not connecting. You're depleted of serotonin, and the neurotransmitters they allow the brain to connect and communicate. And when things aren't communicating right, when the serotonin is drained, then your heart races. You have all these different feelings. Yeah. So I talk about that more in the message, but it's a pretty scary thing.
In this depersonalization, you feel detached, and I mean, as a Christian, one of the things you want to be attached to is God, right? The Holy Spirit speaking to your heart, and this closeness with Him when you read His Word. His Spirit, bears witness with the truth that you're reading. Was that changed as well during this time period for you?
Probably the hardest thing, here I'm a pastor, and I've always known the presence of God. Like, when you read your Bible in the morning, or you're studying, and different times in your life, you're drawing close to God, you feel Him. The worst thing is during that time, I couldn't feel God. And it wasn't that God wasn't there, but it goes to this thing that happens in your brain. You become, or at least I did, you become almost emotionless. You don't connect. Like I remember, even there's something when you drink a cup of coffee, there's a relationship with that somehow.
For sure, it brings you joy.
Yeah, there's a connection, but there was no connection with anything.
Really.
And I remember the worst day, being in the shower one day, and I was feeling so bad with all this, and I just felt like God was a million miles away, and I just was crying out to God, and I couldn't get an answer, And I learned later Okay, it's not, God has always been there. His word is true. But when you're going through this, you experience, that's the scary part, because you're a Christian, you know the Lord. Lord, why won't you help me? You know, people have felt that, God, this is so bad. Why won't you help me? And it all has to do with what's happening with the, you know, things in your brain, but it can be very troubling, and that's a very real thing.
So the solution for you was some kind of medication to help balance things out, to help you have time to heal? Is that
well, the first thing
was?
that helped me was, like I said, how I prayed and asked the Lord for wisdom. What really helped me was finding that this was a real thing, because I didn't know what was happening to me. I had never heard of it.
Am I going crazy?
Right.
You know, what's going on? Yeah.
So being able to read about some things and then come to the realization that this is probably what I have instead of the physical, you know.
And I guess the challenging thing and the tough part about it is it's physical debilitation, it's mental debilitation, and like we just talked about, spiritual as well.
Right.
It's just every aspect of your person was affected by this. And I know we're getting short on time here, but I want to just address, you know, the pastors out there, those out there who people turn to for answers, and many times they don't even know what they're dealing with. And so now that you've been through something like this, what were the lessons that you've learned, and now you try to use some things to help you as you help others?
Yeah. Well, I remember feeling when I went through it, like I said, I'd never heard of it here. I'm a pastor. I've never heard of this. But I remember feeling very strongly that, pastors just don't know, you know, and you want to be careful not to hurt your people. You have people probably in your congregation that are dealing with this, and don't write them off, and don't just, you know, it's a very real thing. And I learned that. I would have been the pastor before, like, you know, just read your Bible, just pray, you know. That's what I would have said. That's a lot of pastors do. I don't think that they're intentionally doing it. It's a matter of ignorance.
Sure.
It's just not knowing. And so people come to me that need help. You know, I try to point them to the things that I went through, and that there is hope, and you can get through it, and there are other avenues to get the help that you need. Biggest thing is that there's hope. You know, that you don't have to live this way. You can get through it. The Lord helped me to get through it.
Sure.
And it was the darkest time in my life, but God helped me through, you know. So.
Well, I appreciate you coming on and talking with us about this, because this is something that, like I said, when you talked about it at our church, I was just blown away by it, and I was very convicted about, you know, how many times I would judge people when I really don't know what they're going through. You know, they're like, "Oh, I've got anxiety." Okay, that's an excuse.
Right.
But for some, it is not.
Yeah. Yeah, and if you're interested, like I said, watch the video, because it goes into everything, explains it much better than we had time to do here.
Absolutely.
But it's a real thing, and people can get help. So.
Thank you so much. Yep. And make sure you check out that video, that link to the video in the description below here on our YouTube channel. And make sure also that you like this video, and please share it with those that will be benefited by it as well. And we would encourage you to check out all the other videos on the YouTube channel, and also on the audio-only platforms as well. God bless you.